The bell above the bakery door chimed softly as Thomas Red stepped inside, his designer suit a little wrinkled from another long day of meetings. He looked like a man who had everything, except peace. The warm scent of vanilla and sugar wrapped around him, but even that sweetness couldn't touch the heaviness in his chest. Beside him, his 4-year-old daughter, Sophie, skipped toward the glass display, her pigtails bouncing. Her tiny hand pressed against the counter as she pointed. "Daddy, can we get the pink ones?" she asked, her voice bubbling with excitement. Thomas smiled faintly. "The pink ones, huh?" Sophie nodded, eyes wide. "They're Mommy's favorite." The words hit him harder than he expected, his throat tightened. Tomorrow was her 5th birthday, and for weeks Sophie had been asking the same question. Will Mommy be there? He never knew how to answer. Rachel had left 8 months ago, saying she couldn't handle being a CEO's wife. Too much travel, too many expectations, too little life. She'd walked out of their glass house without looking back. Since then, Thomas had tried to fill the silence with bedtime stories, extra hugs, and weekend picnics. But children felt things adults tried to hide. Sophie still cried for her mother at night, whispering her name like a prayer. Now, as she pressed her nose to the glass, her reflection shimmered beside rows of pink cupcakes. Thomas watched her, his heart torn between pride and heartbreak. A cheerful voice interrupted his thoughts. "Can I help you find something?" He turned to see a woman standing behind the counter. She wasn't dressed like the others in bright uniforms, just a simple cream dress, flour on her hands, hair loosely tied back. There was a warmth about her, a calmness that softened the noise of the world. "I couldn't help overhearing," she said gently, crouching down to Sophie's height. "The pink cupcakes are my favorite too." Sophie grinned instantly. "Really? Really?" The woman smiled. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sophie." "It's my birthday tomorrow. I'm gonna be 5. "That's a magical age," the woman said with a soft laugh. "I'm Emma." Thomas watched the exchange in quiet wonder. Sophie rarely opened up to strangers anymore. But here she was, talking, smiling, alive. Something about Emma's gentle voice reached through the wall Sophie had built. "We'll take 2 dozen of the pink ones," Thomas said, clearing his throat. As Emma carefully placed cupcakes into boxes, Sophie tugged on her sleeve. "Are you a mommy?" Emma hesitated, eyes flickering with something unspoken. "No, sweetie, not yet." Thomas felt that answer hang in the air like a secret. He glanced at Sophie, who had already gone back to admiring the cupcakes, and then back at Emma. There was something steady and kind about her, something that stirred an impossible thought deep inside him. As Emma handed him the boxes, their fingers brushed for a moment. A current of quiet understanding passed between them. Outside, Thomas buckled Sophie into her car seat. She hummed softly, clutching the bakery box, and as he closed the door, one thought refused to leave his mind. Maybe she could help. That was the moment everything began to change. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. The city lights bled through the blinds, streaking across his walls like restless thoughts. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at Sophie's party invitations scattered on the dresser. 20 children, 20 parents, all families that still looked whole. He imagined Sophie's face tomorrow when her mother didn't show up. The confusion, the quiet hurt, the way she'd look at other moms laughing with their kids and realize hers wasn't coming. Again, he rubbed his face, feeling the weight of it all. Then Emma's voice echoed in his memory. "The pink cupcakes are my favorite too." Something about her calm, about how Sophie had opened up to her, lingered. A wild thought took root. It was ridiculous, unthinkable. But maybe it could work. The next morning, Thomas dressed quickly and drove back to the bakery before it opened. He sat in his car for 10 minutes, debating with himself, heart pounding. When Emma finally arrived, carrying a box of supplies, he stepped out. She looked startled but smiled politely. "You're back early. Forgot something?" Thomas took a breath. "Actually, I need to ask you something, and I know it's going to sound completely insane." Her expression softened, cautious but open. "All right," she said slowly. "I'm listening." He told her everything, about Rachel leaving, about Sophie's heartbreak, about the birthday party tomorrow. Emma listened quietly, her brow furrowing. "And you want me to? What exactly?" "I know how this sounds," Thomas said quickly. "But would you pretend to be my wife for 1 week? Just until Sophie's birthday passes, just so she doesn't feel alone." Emma blinked, speechless. You're asking me to lie to a child? I'm asking you to give her one happy memory, Thomas replied, voice cracking slightly. Just one day where she feels loved. I'll pay you whatever you want. You'd stay in our guest house. Nothing inappropriate. I just want to protect her. Emma was silent for a long time. Her gaze drifted to the street where the morning sun glowed softly over the sidewalks. I'm a kindergarten teacher, she said finally. I know how deeply kids feel absence. But Thomas lies, even kind ones, can confuse them. He nodded, his jaw tight. I've tried everything else. Please, just watch her for a moment. Through the bakery window, Sophie was visible in the car, her little hand pressed to the glass, smiling at a bird outside. She cries herself to sleep some nights, Thomas whispered. Calling for her mama, something in Emma's face shifted, a flicker of compassion, of understanding. She turned back to him. 1 week, she asked quietly. 1 week, Thomas promised. She hesitated one last second, then nodded. All right, but we set boundaries. I sleep in the guest house, and you tell her the truth when it's over. Thomas exhaled in relief, gratitude flooding his face. Deal, and just like that, stranger's kindness began to rewrite a little girl's story. The morning of Sophie's birthday dawned bright and golden. Balloons floated across the living room, ribbons dangled from the ceiling, and the scent of fresh cupcakes filled the air. Thomas checked his watch nervously. Any moment now, Emma would arrive. When the doorbell finally rang, Sophie darted toward it, her tiny feet padding against the wooden floor. She swung the door open, and there stood Emma, holding a beautifully wrapped present and smiling softly. She wore a yellow dress that caught the sunlight just right. Happy birthday, Sophie, she said warmly. Sophie gasped. You came. Emma knelt and opened her arms. Sophie ran straight into them, giggling. Thomas stood frozen for a moment, watching the scene unfold, and in that instant he knew this might have been the best decision he'd ever made. The party began, the house filled with laughter and chatter. Children chased balloons through the yard while parents sipped coffee and made small talk. But Thomas only saw one thing, Sophie's smile. It hadn't been that bright in months. Emma moved through the chaos with a grace that seemed effortless. She helped pour drinks, served cake, and even led the kids in a silly dance game. Everyone assumed she was Thomas's new partner. A few moms whispered approvingly, relieved to see him moving on. Thomas didn't correct them. For once, the illusion didn't hurt. It healed. At one point, Sophie stood on a chair to blow out her candles. She looked around the room, then turned toward Emma and said, I'm so happy you're here, Mommy. The word froze everyone for a moment. Thomas felt his chest tighten, but Emma didn't flinch. She smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from Sophie's face. I'm happy I'm here too, sweetheart, she said softly. The room melted back into laughter and applause, but Thomas's heart was no longer steady. He knew this was dangerous for all of them. Yet as he watched Sophie hugging Emma, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. That night, after the guests had gone and Sophie had fallen asleep clutching her new doll, Thomas and Emma sat outside on the porch. The sky was deep blue, stars faintly shimmering. You were incredible today, he said quietly. Emma smiled faintly. She's a special little girl. She hasn't laughed like that in months, Thomas admitted. You made her believe in happiness again. Emma looked down, twisting her fingers in her lap. And what happens when I leave? Thomas hesitated. He hadn't let himself think that far. I'll tell her something gentle, that you had to travel for work or visit family. Emma sighed. She's smart, Thomas. She'll know. He nodded slowly. I know. For a moment they sat in silence, the sound of crickets filling the air. Then Emma whispered, I didn't expect to care this much. Thomas turned to her, meeting her gaze. Neither did I. Somewhere in that quiet space between truth and pretense, something real had begun to grow. The cafe was closing when they finally stepped outside. The fairy lights above flickered, and the sound of rain softened against the glass. His daughter, Era, was fast asleep in Emily's arms, her tiny hands still clutching the balloon she'd refused to let go of all day. Daniel watched them for a moment. This stranger who had stepped into his chaos and somehow brought warmth back into it. He whispered almost to himself, I wish I could thank you properly. Emily smiled, the kind that hides everything it's feeling. You already did. She smiled today, Daniel. That's enough, but he shook his head. No, you didn't just save her birthday, you saved me too. There was silence, the kind that speaks louder than words, Emily slowly placed the sleeping child into his arms. The air carried the faint scent of birthday candles and rain, and somewhere in that quiet, something in Daniel healed. She turned to leave, her umbrella catching the dim light. "Goodbye, Mr. Thompson," she said softly. "Emily," he called out. She stopped. "Why did you say yes that day? You didn't even know us." Emily hesitated. Her eyes glistened as she said, "Because someone once did the same for me when I had nothing left," and then she walked away. Days turned into weeks. Life slipped back into its routine. Lunch boxes, work calls, bedtime stories. But something had changed in that small apartment. Era would talk about Mommy Emily every night before bed. Daniel never corrected her. He couldn't bring himself to. One morning, as he packed Era's bag, he found a small note tucked in the birthday gift Emily had left behind. It read, "Sometimes family isn't who we're born with. It's who shows up when the world falls apart." His hands trembled a little as he read it. He looked at his daughter's smile, that same smile Emily had fought to protect, and he whispered, "Thank you." Months later, the cafe bell chimed again. Emily stood there, nervous but smiling. She had moved back to the city, starting over. And this time, she didn't need to pretend. Era ran toward her, shouting, "Mommy Emily." The moment froze in Daniel's mind like a photograph. He didn't stop her. He didn't want to. Emily knelt down, tears in her eyes, and hugged the little girl tight. Daniel stood behind them, silent, grateful, realizing that sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't about romance, they're about kindness that stays. As the frame faded, a soft narration carried the final note. We never know what someone's kindness can heal. Sometimes pretending becomes the truest thing of all. It fade out. Soft piano outro, the end, but the feeling lingers.